The room was silent, except for the muffled sound of his breathing. His hands held the phone so tightly that his knuckles were white. On the screen, the doctor's message confirmed what he already knew, but still couldn't process. The diagnosis came with a number. 6 months, maybe a year. He reread the message 3 times as if the words might change their meaning. They didn't. He placed the phone on the table slowly and stood there staring into space. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stood there. And in that brutal silence, a question began to take shape, not as a thought, but as a physical presence in his chest. Why? Not why me, but something even more fundamental. Why does this have to mean something? Because that's what we do when the ground disappears from under our feet. We seek explanation, reason, purpose, as if pain could be tamed by meaning, as if suffering were more bearable when it comes with an instruction manual. Modern society has taught us that everything has a hidden lesson, that every wound comes with its own bandage wrapped in inspirational phrases. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. This is happening for you, not to you. You'll come out of this stronger. Comforting lies that transform suffering into cosmic pedagogy, as if the universe were a strict but fair teacher, testing us for our own good. But what no one prepares you to face is the most terrifying possibility of all. What if there is no lesson? What if pain is just pain? Arbitrary, purposeless, with no built-in redemption. What if you are just another body among billions going through the raw experience of existence with no script, no audience, no guaranteed meaning? This is the truth that the Book of Job has carried for 3,000 years and that contemporary self-help spends all its energy trying to bury. Job is not a story about resilience. It is a mirror held up to the naked face of inexplicable suffering. And what that mirror shows is so uncomfortable that most people prefer to turn away. Job loses everything: children, fortune, health, dignity. Not because he did something wrong, not as a consequence of bad choices, not as a karmic lesson or divine test. He loses because he does, because life is capable of that. And when his friends show up to comfort him, they don't bring hugs. They bring theory, explanations, justifications. You must have sinned. God is teaching you humility. It will make sense in the end. Each sentence is violence disguised as wisdom, because deep down they are not trying to ease Job's pain. They are trying to ease their own terror in the face of a universe that allows suffering for no reason. If they can find a reason for Job's pain, they will be protected. Theirs will make sense. Theirs will be fair. But it isn't. And it never was. And that is the truth they taught you to fear more than the pain itself. The first silent pact you make with suffering is this: it must be worth something. It cannot be in vain. It cannot be wasted. If you are going to carry this burden, at least let it be transformed into wisdom, into strength, into purpose. That's why the shelves are full of books promising to find the meaning of pain. That's why every tragedy must become a journey of overcoming. Because the idea of suffering for no reason, without growth, without learning, without reward in the end, is too unbearable for the modern mind to process. This obsession is not accidental. It has been cultivated. The culture of productivity has invaded even our most intimate moments of pain and turned them into opportunities for personal development. You don't suffer. You are transforming. You haven't broken. You are being polished. Every tear must yield an insight. Every wound must become inspiring content. Suffering has become raw material for the self-actualization industry, and you have internalized this logic so much that you don't even realize how much it violates you. Because when pain comes and you can't find the reason, you can't extract the lesson, you can't turn it into an uplifting narrative, you don't just suffer the original pain. You suffer a second, even more devastating layer: the guilt of suffering wrongly, of not taking advantage of the opportunity for growth that the universe has generously offered you, as if you were a negligent student who is not paying attention in the class of life. And then comes the question that eats away at you inside: why haven't I learned yet? Why does it still hurt if I should have already found the meaning? This is the cruelest trap of the culture of purpose. It turns suffering into a test. And if you can't pass that test, if you can't emerge stronger, wiser, more grateful, then the fault lies not with the pain. It lies with you. You are not resilient enough. You are not evolved enough. You are not spiritual enough. Pain offered you the chance to transcend, and you wasted it. Now you carry not only the weight of what happened, but the additional weight of your own inadequacy in the face of it. And this is exactly where the violence is complete. Because you stop questioning whether it is fair that pain must have meaning and start questioning why you cannot make sense of it. The structure remains untouched. The premise remains unquestionable. The problem is never the absurd demand that all suffering must be educational. The problem is always you, who is unable to learn the lesson. Job's friends knew this well. Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, 3 men who couldn't simply be with Job's pain. They needed to explain it. Justify it, put it in order. The righteous don't suffer like this, they said. There must be hidden sin in you. Confess, repent, and then God will restore everything. It was perfect, mathematical, comforting logic. The world worked by rules, cause and effect, action and consequence. If you suffer, it's because you deserve it. If you're in pain, it's because there's something you need to fix. The universe is fair. Pain has a purpose. Lie. But it's a lie that we cling to so tightly that our fingers turn white. Because admitting that the universe has no plan, that suffering can be arbitrary, that you can do everything right and still be crushed, is to give up a kind of control that keeps us functioning. If pain always has a reason, then we can avoid it. We can protect ourselves. We can become good enough, conscious enough, spiritual enough that tragedy won't reach us. But what if pain is random? What if it doesn't choose its targets? What if there is no barrier of merit to protect us? Then we are all vulnerable, all the time. And that is pure terror. That's why we build this elaborate architecture of justifications. Karma, soul lessons, the divine plan, the cycles of growth. Each system, a sophisticated attempt to impose order on chaos, to transform the arbitrary into the intentional, to make the universe seem less indifferent than it really is. Not because these explanations are true, but because living without them requires a kind of courage that few are willing to cultivate. Job does not accept his friend's explanations. He cries out, he questions, he demands answers from God. And what does he receive? Silence. A deafening silence that stretches across chapters and chapters. Pain does not come with justification. It does not come with a letter of explanation. It does not come with a promise that it will make sense in the end. It is simply there, occupying all the space, crushing everything, and refusing to be transformed into a lesson. This is what modern society cannot bear. Suffering that cannot be tamed. Pain that does not turn into growth. The wound that does not heal into insight. Because if such pain exists, and it does, then the whole industry of meaning collapses. All the life coaches, all the motivational phrases, all the spirituality that promises that everything happens for a reason. All of this is revealed for what it always was. A comforting fantasy constructed so that we don't have to look at the naked truth of suffering without purpose. And you know this, because you've been there. In the place where no explanation fits, where no inspirational quote touches, where pain is just pain. With no moral to the story, no built-in lesson, no light at the end of the tunnel that you can see. And when someone tried to give you an explanation, tried to convince you that there was a greater reason, you didn't feel comforted. You felt even more alone, because they weren't speaking to your pain. They were speaking to their fear of your pain. There is a specific moment when this becomes clear. When you realize that the people around you need your pain to make sense more than you do. When you understand that every attempt to convince you that everything has a purpose is not about helping you. It's about preserving their illusion of control. Because if you can suffer like this for no reason gratuitously, then the protection they have built around themselves is just fantasy. And they are not ready to face that. So they insist, kindly, compassionately, with all the appearance of care. But deep down, what they're asking is for you to lie, to make up a narrative, to turn your chaos into a coherent story so they can sleep peacefully at night, knowing that the world still makes sense, that there is justice, that there is order, that there is protection for those who do everything right. And the hardest truth about suffering is not that it hurts, it's that it can hurt for no reason. And that changes everything. Kierkegaard called this anguish, not the fear of something specific, but the vertigo in the face of nothingness. The terror that points to no object, no concrete threat, no problem you can solve. It's the feeling of hanging over a bottomless abyss, knowing that there is no rope holding you but also no fall, just suspension. Anxiety is the experience of existing without guarantees, without a script, without a metaphysical safety net. And that's exactly what Job experiences when everything falls apart and he cries out for explanations that don't come. Anxiety isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive with sirens. It settles in quietly, like a weight on your chest that you can't name. It's waking up in the morning and realizing that there's no reason to get up, but also no reason to stay in bed. It's paralysis in the face of a world that continues to demand that you function, that you produce meaning, that you transform emptiness into purpose, while everything inside you knows that there is nothing to transform. Just emptiness, raw, non-negotiable. And it is in this state that the comforters appear. Because Job's friends didn't just bring theological theories. They brought something much more violent. The demand that he transform his suffering into a coherent narrative. That he confess a sin he did not commit so that the pain would make sense. That he accept an invented guilt so that the universe would be logical again. It was a cruel but seductive offer. Admit that you are guilty and everything will be explained. You suffer because you deserve it. And if you deserve it, then you can stop deserving it. There is control. There is justice. There is order, but Job refuses. He refuses to lie about himself to alleviate the existential anxiety of others. He will not confess to a sin he did not commit. He will not accept a false narrative just because it is comforting. And this refusal is revolutionary, because he is saying something that society does not tolerate. I suffer for no reason, and I will not pretend that there is one. Think of the courage that requires, not just to endure the pain, but to endure the added loneliness of refusing the explanations that everyone around you is desperate for you to accept. It's easier to lie, easier to say yes, it must be a test from God, or yes, there must be a lesson here, or yes, I'm growing from this. Because when you do that, you become part of the community again. You become understandable again. You fit back into the shared framework of meaning. But when you refuse, when you insist on inhabiting the raw truth of arbitrary suffering, you become unbearable, a walking mirror of the vulnerability that everyone tries to deny. That's what they do to you when you're in pain and no one knows how to deal with it. They offer you ready-made explanations. You attracted this with negative thoughts. It's karma from past lives. God is preparing you for something greater. Each phrase is a way to transform your incomprehensible suffering into something manageable, categorizable, tamed, because your meaningless pain threatens the illusion of control they have built. If you can suffer like this for no reason, then so can they. And that is unbearable. So they do what Job's friends did. They turn the victim into the defendant. Subtly, gently, with every appearance of compassion. Have you tried meditation? Maybe you're playing the victim. Have you considered that there might be a lesson in this? Each suggestion, an implicit request. Please find an explanation for your pain, because I can't live with the possibility that there isn't one. And you try. Of course you try. Because siding with Job's friends is easier than siding with Job. You seek out therapists who teach you to reframe. You read books about the power of positive thinking. You attend groups where everyone has turned tragedy into an inspiring testimony. And for a while you even manage to perform it. You manage to say, I'm growing from this, with a smile that is almost convincing. You manage to post about gratitude and lessons learned. You manage to use the correct vocabulary of overcoming. But at night, when you're alone and your body still hurts, when the absence still fills the room, when the emptiness cannot be filled by any uplifting narrative, you know you're lying. You know that pain has not turned into wisdom. You know you're not in the process of healing. You're just suffering, without purpose, without meaning, without learning that justifies the price. And that's when the real loneliness begins. Not the loneliness of being alone. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who demand that you translate your suffering into a language they understand, that you turn your cry into articulate speech, that you find the meaning they need to exist. Job spent 40 chapters screaming alone while 3 men chattered incessantly around him. He was surrounded and utterly helpless, because no one could simply be with him in his pain. Everyone needed to heal it, explain it, solve it. There is a brutal difference between consolation and violence disguised as consolation. Real comfort is silent. It is presence without demands. It is the ability to sit next to someone in the darkness without needing to turn on a light, without needing to explain why the darkness exists, without needing to promise that it will end soon. But this requires that you also tolerate the darkness, that you also face the possibility that there is no switch, no guaranteed way out, no meaning waiting to be discovered. And few can, so they talk. They fill the silence with theories, with promises, with explanations that serve them more than they serve you. And every word is a small act of violence, because it is asking you to abandon your real experience in favor of a shared fantasy. It is asking you to betray yourself in order to preserve collective comfort. This is what Kierkegaardian anguish reveals. You are fundamentally alone in your existence. No one can carry this for you. No one can give meaning for you. No one can transform your absurdity into coherence. You can be in a room full of people and still be radically alone, because the existential vertigo you feel is non-transferable. And when people try to give you ready-made explanations, they are not helping you out of the abyss. They are asking you to pretend that the abyss does not exist, but it does exist. And Job will not pretend that it does not, even if it costs him the last thing he has left, the illusion that the universe cares, even if it means standing alone in his truth while everyone around him shares a comfortable lie. Because there is a fierce dignity in refusing to domesticate pain, in not turning the scream into a palatable melody, in not wrapping chaos in gift paper to make it easier for others to digest. And perhaps it is precisely this refusal that makes Job unbearable, not the pain itself, but the insistence on not lying about it. When God finally answers Job, it is not with the explanation he expected. It is not with the justification his friends promised. It is not with the comfort that the pain seemed to deserve. God answers with questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you bind the constellations? Question after question, each more disconcerting than the last. And what these questions say, without saying it directly, is this: the universe was not built to make sense to you. It simply exists, vast, indifferent, operating on scales your mind cannot process. It is the most brutal answer possible, because it does not deny Job's pain. It does not minimize it. It doesn't justify it. It just puts everything in such a broad perspective that any attempt to find personal purpose in suffering reveals itself for what it always was: a narcissistic illusion. The idea that the cosmos should organize itself around your wounds, that your tears should have cosmic weight, that the universe should give you an explanation, but it doesn't have to, and it never did. And that is the truth that no one wants to hear, because it collapses the entire architecture of meaning that we spend our lives building. All the logic that everything happens for a reason. All the belief that we are protagonists in a cosmic narrative that makes sense when viewed from afar. All the fantasy that there is a benevolent author writing our script with wisdom that we cannot yet comprehend. There isn't. There is only vastness, indifference, silence. Albert Camus understood this when he wrote about the absurd. Not absurd as a synonym for ridiculous, but as the fundamental condition of human existence, the confrontation between the human need for meaning and the indifferent silence of the universe. We are born programmed to seek patterns, causes, meanings, but the world was not programmed to provide them. This incompatibility between what we demand and what the world offers is the absurd, and there is no resolution. There is no synthesis. There is no moment when the two ends meet and everything makes sense. Absurdity is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be inhabited. And most people spend their entire lives trying to escape this truth. They construct elaborate philosophical systems. They embrace religions that promise that everything will make sense in the afterlife. They immerse themselves in ideologies that offer total narratives about why the world is the way it is. Each strategy is a way of not having to face the naked silence of the universe, a way of not having to acknowledge that we are alone in a cosmos that doesn't know we exist and wouldn't care if it did. You can spend your whole life trying to force the universe to speak. You can consult all the philosophies, all the religions, all the systems of meaning available. You can construct elaborate narratives about why things happen the way they do. You can convince yourself that there is a divine plan or karma at work or a cosmic justice that eventually balances everything out. But deep down, when you are alone with the raw pain, when all the books are closed and all the theories fall silent, the silence remains. Dense, heavy, unyielding. And there is something paradoxically liberating about that. Because if the universe has no obligation to make sense, then you have no obligation to find one either. Pain can just be pain. Loss can just be loss. Tragedy can just be tragedy. No built-in lesson, no hidden purpose, no guaranteed growth at the end. And recognizing this is not giving up. It is to stop fighting reality so that you can finally inhabit it. It is to stop wasting energy trying to decipher a message that was never sent. It is to stop looking for patterns where there is only chaos. It is to stop demanding that life behave according to your moral expectations of what is fair, what is deserved, what makes sense. Because life has no commitment to your expectations, it never has. And to continue pretending that it does is only to prolong the suffering. But accepting the absurd does not mean passive resignation. Camus was very clear about this. He said that we should imagine Sisyphus happy, the man condemned to push a rock up a mountain forever, knowing that it will always roll back down. Why? Because Sisyphus keeps pushing, aware of the futility, aware that there is no redemption waiting at the top. And yet he persists, not out of hope, not out of faith in a greater purpose, but out of a kind of lucid revolt against the absurd. He chooses to continue despite the emptiness, not because of some hidden meaning. That is the crucial difference. It is not optimism. It is not toxic positivity disguised as philosophy. It is the conscious refusal to bow down to the indifference of the universe. It is saying, you owe me nothing. There is no meaning waiting for me. There is no guaranteed reward. But I will continue to exist. I will continue to create. I will continue to find moments of beauty and meaning, not because they have cosmic validity, but because I decide they have value to me. Job does the same thing. After God finishes speaking, or rather, not speaking, just showing the indifferent vastness of the cosmos, Job does not receive peace. He does not receive understanding. He does not receive the explanation he spent 40 chapters demanding. What he receives is something more fundamental. He stops needing an explanation, not because he found answers, but because he finally understood that the universe owes him no answers, or anyone else. This is not conformity. It is existential maturity. It is the difference between a child who cries "it's not fair" when something bad happens, and an adult who understands that justice is a human invention, not a cosmic law. The universe is neither fair nor unfair. It simply is. And you can spend your whole life fighting against it, demanding that reality behave according to your moral expectations, or you can learn to inhabit a world that was not made to comfort you. The temptation, of course, is to flee from this confrontation. Camus called this philosophical suicide, not necessarily taking one's own life, but killing one's awareness of the absurd. You do this when you accept a religious narrative that promises that everything has meaning, even if you don't understand it now. You do this when you throw yourself headlong into ideologies that offer total explanations for human suffering. You do this when you turn your pain into an uplifting story of overcoming adversity, convincing yourself that it had to happen for you to become who you are today. Each of these outlets is a way to escape the starkest truth. You suffered, for no reason, for no purpose, with no guaranteed compensation. And now you have to decide whether you're going to live with that truth or spend the rest of your life constructing elaborate fantasies so you don't have to face it. Job faces it, and the price for that is high. Because once you stop looking for external meaning, once you accept that the universe is not going to give you a script, you're left alone with a terrifying freedom. The freedom to construct your own meaning. Not because it was there waiting to be discovered, but because you decided to create it, knowing that it is arbitrary, knowing that it has no cosmic validity, knowing that it's just you, doing the best you can with the fragments of an existence that promised no coherence. And perhaps that is exactly where the answer that God did not give, but which is implicit in the silence, lies. You are free, terribly, radically free, free to create meaning where there is none, free to continue existing even without guarantees, free to choose how to inhabit the absurd. And that is more frightening than any divine punishment could ever be. But there is a problem with this freedom. A problem that no one warns you about until you are already in the middle of it. Because modern society has turned even absurd pain into a product. It has sold you the idea that suffering can be optimized, managed, transformed into something useful. That there is a right way to deal with existential emptiness. That there are practices, techniques, methods that will teach you to make peace with suffering. As if peace were something you negotiate through emotional productivity. Contemporary culture does not tolerate unproductive suffering. All pain must yield something. It must become self-knowledge, spiritual evolution, inspiring content, a testimony of overcoming. It needs to be documented, processed, transformed into a palatable narrative that other people can consume and be inspired by. The pain market is booming. Coaches sell methods for reframing trauma. Influencers monetize their tragedies by turning them into motivational journeys. Therapists promise that you will grow through what destroyed you. And you tried, didn't you? You tried meditating to calm your anguish. You tried writing in journals to process the pain. You tried therapy, self-help, spirituality of all kinds. You tried to transform chaos into manageable data, mood charts, gratitude lists. Not because you believed it would work, but because the idea of simply being with the pain, doing nothing, producing nothing, growing through it, is so intolerable that any action seems better than immobility. This is what the culture of productivity has done to suffering. It has turned even the moment of greatest human vulnerability into an opportunity for optimization. You can't just suffer. You have to suffer productively. You have to extract lessons. You have to document the process. You have to emerge on the other side with something to show for it. An insight, a transformation, an improved version of yourself that justifies all the investment of pain. As if pain were an investment. As if you needed to get a return on your suffering. As if there were a universal exchange rate where you trade X amount of tears for Y amount of wisdom. What if you can't make that conversion? What if you've suffered immensely and have nothing to show for it but scars? Then you've wasted it. You failed even at suffering properly. But Job doesn't do that. When everything falls apart, he doesn't create a 5-step plan for reframing. He doesn't turn loss into inspirational content. He doesn't look for ways to make suffering productive. He simply suffers, he cries out, he questions, and then when the answers don't come, he stays. In discomfort, in meaninglessness, in the absence of a comforting narrative. And there is a fierce dignity in that we have forgotten how to recognize. Because dignity is not about overcoming. It is not about transforming. It is not about growing. Dignity is about enduring without lying about what you are enduring. It is about crossing the void without pretending that it is a portal to some greater revelation. It is about suffering consciously without decorating the pain with theories that make it palatable for public consumption. And that frees you in a way that no reframing technique ever could. Because if you don't need to transform your pain into learning, then you can finally stop performing. You can stop forcing yourself to find the silver lining. You can stop pretending to be grateful for experiences that destroyed you. You can stop lying to yourself about growing when all you're doing is surviving. Survival, in fact, is enough. It doesn't need to be accompanied by evolution. It doesn't need to prove anything. Did you wake up today even after everything? That's already everything. Do you keep breathing even when life has lost its script? That's already dignity. Do you exist despite the lack of guarantees, despite the absence of meaning, despite the silence of the universe? That's already rebellion. You don't need to turn this into an inspiring story for it to have value. The truth is that most of the things that broke you didn't teach you anything. They just broke you. And you survived not because you were strong, not because you had some inner wisdom waiting to be unlocked, but because the alternative was unbearable. You kept going because there was no option, because the body insists, because life continues to demand your presence even when you have nothing left to offer. And recognizing this, that you went through hell and came out the other side without becoming better, just different, just more aware of your own fragility, is not pessimism. It is honesty. It is the refusal to turn your story into propaganda for the resilience industry. It is saying, I suffered. It was horrible. I learned nothing that justifies the price. And I'm still here. Not because it made me stronger, but because I haven't given up yet. There is power in that. A power that doesn't need to be celebrated. That doesn't need to become an inspirational post. That doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. The silent power of existing without justification. To carry your wounds without turning them into trophies. To recognize that life has given you experiences you never asked for and that you are doing the best you can with the pieces, without pretending that the pieces form a meaningful mosaic. If you've come this far, if these words are touching something you can't name but recognize immediately, maybe it's time to stop looking for meaning where there is none. Maybe it's time to allow yourself to simply exist in the absence of answers, to inhabit the absurd without trying to tame it, to suffer without turning suffering into a project of self-improvement. And if you want to explore this further, not to solve it but to understand it, there are more reflections like this waiting for you. I don't promise answers, but I promise companionship in the question. What Job discovers in the end is not that his pain had a purpose. It is that he can live without needing it to have one. He can wake up every day knowing that the universe did not organize itself around his wound, that there is no cosmic lesson being taught, that there is no guaranteed redemption, and still choose to continue, not out of optimism, not out of naive hope, but out of a kind of existential stubbornness, a refusal to let the indifference of the universe dictate the value of his existence. This is lucid rebellion. It is looking into the void and deciding that even if nothing makes sense, you will create your own moments of meaning, knowing that they are temporary, knowing that they are arbitrary, knowing that they have no validity beyond what you decide to give them, and doing so not as defeat, but as an act of radical freedom, as a conscious choice to exist despite the absurdity, not denying it, but inhabiting it with dignity. But accepting this requires you to let go of something you have held onto with all your strength your entire life, the comforting narrative. The story you tell yourself about how the world works, about how things end up making sense, about how there is always a greater reason operating behind the scenes. This narrative is the last protection, the last shield against the abyss, and abandoning it is a kind of death, not physical death, but the death of the illusion of control, the death of the fantasy that you can protect yourself from arbitrary suffering by being good enough, conscious enough, spiritual enough, the death of the belief that there is an implicit contract between you and the universe. You do your part, and the universe spares you from the worst tragedies. The death of the hope that if you do everything right, if you are virtuous, if you cultivate positive thoughts and gratitude, nothing truly terrible will befall you. But it will, because the universe isn't paying attention. It isn't keeping track of who deserves protection. It isn't distributing suffering based on cosmic justice. Sometimes the kindest person you know gets the diagnosis. Sometimes the father who did everything right loses his child. Sometimes you go through life with extreme care and still the ground crumbles beneath your feet. And there is no explanation. There is no reason. There is no hidden lesson. Just the brutal randomness of existence. This grief is real because you are not just losing an abstract belief. You are losing the comfort of living in a world that makes sense. You are losing the possibility of looking at your pain and finding a reason that makes it bearable. You are losing the assurance that in the end, everything will turn out to be part of a bigger plan. And without that, you are naked before the brutal randomness of existence, without armor, without explanation, without the promise that there will be compensation in the end. It's terrifying. It's disorienting. It's like losing gravity. You no longer know what holds you in place, what protects you from simply floating into the void. Because the comforting narrative was gravity. It was what kept you anchored in the illusion that there is order, that there is meaning, that there is justice operating on scales you cannot see but which eventually reveal themselves. Job goes through this mourning, not when he loses his children, his wealth, his health, but afterwards, when God responds with silence disguised as rhetorical questions, when it becomes clear that no explanation is coming, that there is no hidden meaning waiting to be revealed, that he will have to live with the absence of an answer for the rest of his life, and something in him dies at that moment. Not hope. He is materially restored at the end of the story, but innocence. The ability to believe that the world is fair, that pain is educational, that there is protection for those who deserve it. And it is precisely this loss that matures him, because emotional maturity is not about developing resilience. It's not about getting stronger. It's not about learning to turn trauma into growth. Emotional maturity is about developing the ability to live without guarantees, to exist in a universe that has not promised consistency, to build meaning knowing that it is fragile, temporary, and can be destroyed at any moment by forces beyond your control. It is the ability to love knowing that you may lose, to invest in projects knowing they may fail, to build knowing that everything can fall apart, to create bonds knowing that death, distance, or a simple change in circumstances can break them. And to do all of this not with naivety, not pretending that you are protected, but with the full awareness that you are radically vulnerable, and choosing to live anyway. This changes everything. It changes how you look at your own pain. It changes how you look at the pain of others. Because if you are no longer attached to the fantasy that suffering always has a purpose, you stop trying to find the lesson in other people's wounds. You stop offering comforting explanations when someone is broken. You stop assaulting vulnerable people with theories about karma, divine plans, or soul lessons. And instead, you learn to do something much harder. Simply be present, without fixing, without explaining, without promising that it will make sense someday. Just acknowledging, this is horrible. I don't know why it's happening. I don't have answers, but I'm here. And there is more honesty, more real compassion in that accompanied silence than in any elaborate theory about the purpose of suffering. Job did not receive this presence from his friends. They could not tolerate the absurdity of the situation. They needed to force it to make sense. And in the process, they turned his pain into an intellectual project, a theological puzzle, an opportunity to demonstrate knowledge about the ways of God. They were more interested in preserving their own worldview than in alleviating the suffering of a man who was literally sitting on ashes, scraping wounds with shards of pottery. And you've done this. You've been Job's friend to someone. You've offered explanations when you should have offered silence. You've tried to fix the inconsolable because you couldn't tolerate the possibility that there is no fix. You've turned someone else's pain into an opportunity to demonstrate wisdom, to offer perspective, to prove that you understand how the world works. And the person in front of you didn't feel helped. They felt more alone, because what they needed was not theory. It was someone willing to sit in the darkness with them, without turning on the lights, without mapping out exits, without promising that the darkness is temporary or that it has a pedagogical function. Just the courage to be present in the void, recognizing that there is nothing to do but witness. And that is love, not the love that heals, that transforms, that redeems, but the love that simply remains, even when there is nothing to offer but presence. This is the freedom that comes from accepting that suffering may be meaningless. You stop demanding that people transform their pain into something productive. You stop judging those who are not coping well with tragedy. You stop measuring someone's worth by their ability to emerge stronger from the worst experiences. And you begin to recognize that there is dignity in simply surviving, in waking up every day even when there is no reason to, in continuing to exist even when existence has lost all the comforting narrative that sustained it. Job ends the story materially restored. New children, new fortune, new health. But he is not the same. Something fundamental has changed. He now knows that everything can be taken away again, that there is no protection, that there are no guarantees, that he is as vulnerable as he ever was. And he chooses to live anyway, not because he believes that this time will be different, but because he has learned that vulnerability is the permanent condition of human existence, and that recognizing this is more honest than building castles of illusion, more honest, and paradoxically more liberating. Because when you stop expecting the world to be fair, you stop blaming yourself when it isn't. When you stop looking for purpose in suffering, you stop feeling inadequate for not finding it. When you accept that pain can just be pain, you can finally feel what you really feel, without the added layer of guilt, without the demand for transformation, without the pressure to grow through what destroyed you. And that, finally, is compassion. Not the performative compassion that offers solutions, but the silent compassion that bears witness. The compassion that acknowledges, you have suffered, I cannot fix it, but I can be here. And sometimes that is everything. Sometimes that is more than everything. There is a specific moment in the story of Job that almost no one pays attention to. It is after God finishes speaking, after the silence of the universe becomes clear, after all explanations have been rejected and all theories from friends have been exposed for what they always were, defense mechanisms against the terror of randomness. At that moment, Job says something that sounds like defeat but is actually liberation. I spoke of what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. It is not performative humility. It is not religious submission. It is recognition. The last illusion crumbling. Because the illusion was not that he deserved answers. The illusion was that he needed them. That without explanation, without purpose, without meaning attributed to suffering, he would not be able to continue. That life is only worth living when it makes sense. That existing without a comforting narrative is unbearable. But he is there, still breathing, still existing, without the answers, without the meaning, without the moral compensation that should have come. And he realized that he can do it. That life doesn't have to make sense to be lived. That suffering doesn't have to have a purpose to be endured. That you don't have to understand to endure. This is the last layer, the deepest. Because all the other illusions, that you can avoid suffering by being good, that pain always teaches something, that the universe is fair, you already know these are lies. You've already faced that. You've looked into the void and recognized that no explanation is coming. But this last illusion is more subtle. It's the belief that you can't live without these comforting lies, that you need them to function, that without them, you'll fall apart. And then you discover that you won't, that you are stronger than the narratives that sustained you, that the structure you thought was essential was just scaffolding. And now that the scaffolding has fallen, you realize that the building is still standing, damaged perhaps, modified certainly, but standing, because you weren't as fragile as they led you to believe. You are capable of withstanding the naked truth, the absence of guarantees, the inherent lack of meaning, the radical vulnerability. And there is something profoundly transformative about recognizing this. It is not empowerment in the motivational sense. It is not "you are stronger than you think" as a t-shirt slogan. It is something more sober, more real. It is the recognition that you have already been through the worst. You have already felt the unexplained pain. You have already inhabited the void. You have already gone through the absurd and you have survived. Not because you were special, not because there was a purpose sustaining you, but because the alternative was not an option. And this survival without heroism, without an uplifting narrative, without a lesson learned, is the most concrete proof that you can inhabit life as it really is, unstable, unpredictable, fundamentally without guarantees. This dissolves something, a guilt you didn't even know you carried, the guilt of not being able to make your pain make sense, the guilt of not growing through suffering, the guilt of remaining vulnerable even after everything, the guilt of not having turned your wounds into wisdom that you can sell, package, offer as an inspiring testimony. Because you don't have to do that anymore. You no longer need to justify your existence through the productivity of your suffering. You can simply have suffered and survived. And that's all there is to it. Job doesn't become a guru of resilience. He doesn't write a book on how to turn tragedy into purpose. He doesn't start giving lectures on the 10 steps to finding meaning in pain. He simply goes back to living. He plants, he harvests, he rebuilds. Not because he discovered some cosmic truth, but because life continues to demand that you exist, and he decided he would do so honestly, without pretending to understand, without decorating the experience with theories that make it palatable, just living, aware that everything could fall apart again, aware that there is no protection, and living anyway. This is the final dissolution, not of pain. Pain does not disappear, but of the demand that it must mean something to be valid, of the belief that you are doing something wrong if you cannot extract the lesson, of the additional weight of having to perform growth when all you are doing is surviving the next day. And when that dissolves, something changes. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but you realize that you can breathe a little deeper, that you can look at your wounds without the urgency to turn them into something else, that you can exist in fragility without feeling inadequate, that you can say "I don't know" without it being a failure, that you can inhabit uncertainty without panicking, that you can recognize that you have no control without feeling like you're falling apart. Because you've already fallen apart. You've already been at rock bottom. You've already faced the worst. And you've discovered that the worst isn't the end. It's just another place, painful, lonely, devoid of meaning, but livable. And if you can inhabit the worst, you can inhabit anything. Not with optimism, not with certainty, but with the peace of mind of someone who knows they've been there and survived. Not because you deserved it, but because it happened. And that, paradoxically, is enough. So what do you do with that? With this awareness that suffering doesn't have to make sense, with this terrifying freedom to exist without a cosmic script, with this recognition that you can inhabit the absurd without having to tame it, you start small, because the temptation is to turn even this into a grand project, into a new identity, into a philosophy of life that you will proclaim and defend. But that's not it. It's not about exchanging one comforting narrative for another. It's simply about stopping demanding a narrative. It's about allowing things to be what they are, including you. You start by stopping judging your own pain, stopping measuring whether you are dealing well or badly with what happened, stopping comparing your process with the process of other people who seem to be getting over it better, stopping timing how long you should take to recover from something that has no expiration date, just recognizing, this hurts. It still hurts. Maybe it will always hurt a little. And that's okay. Pain doesn't need an expiration date to be legitimate. You start by allowing the days to be different. That some mornings you wake up with a quiet clarity about the fragility of existence, and others you wake up with the crushing weight that nothing makes sense. And neither is more true than the other. Both are just states, temporary, passing. They don't define who you are or how much you've grown. They just describe where you are at that specific moment. And that too shall pass. It always does. Not because there is purpose in suffering, but because everything is impermanent, including pain. You start by recognizing when you are performing recovery for others, when you are saying you are fine because that is what they expect to hear, when you are fabricating insights because someone needs your pain to have taught you something, and you can just stop. You can say, I don't know when they ask you what you've learned. You can say it still hurts when they expect you to have moved on. You can refuse to turn your experience into an uplifting lesson for others to consume. You can keep your pain to yourself, not as a shameful secret, but as something that simply doesn't need to be translated into a public narrative. You start by changing how you respond to other people's pain, by stopping offering explanations when someone is suffering, by stopping promising that it will make sense someday, by stopping looking for the silver lining when there isn't one, just being there, present, silent when necessary, honest always, saying this is horrible and I don't have answers instead of everything happens for a reason, because you now know how violent that phrase is, how much it adds loneliness to pain, how much it requires the person to lie about what they are feeling in order to preserve the comfort of those offering consolation. You start by consciously constructing meaning from its arbitrariness, choosing to invest in things that matter to you, knowing that they have no cosmic validity, knowing that they can be destroyed, knowing that there are no guarantees, and doing so not with naivety, but with the courage of someone who knows that everything is fragile and chooses to love, create, and build anyway. Not because you believe you are protected this time, but because the alternative, not investing, not loving, not creating for fear of loss, is death in life. And you already know enough death. You have already inhabited enough emptiness. You have decided that you will choose life, knowing that it can hurt, choosing anyway. And little by little, this ceases to be a conscious effort and simply becomes how you exist. You stop waking up looking for meaning. You stop analyzing every experience in search of a lesson. You stop demanding that the universe explain itself. You just live, observe, feel, respond, build, destroy, rebuild, without a script, without the promise of coherence, without the expectation that it will make sense when viewed from afar. Job ends the story differently than he began. No longer wiser in the traditional sense, no longer stronger, no longer protected, but more real, more honest, more capable of inhabiting life as it is rather than as it should be. And that is the only transformation that matters. Not the one that makes you invulnerable, but the one that allows you to be consciously vulnerable. Not the one that gives you answers, but the one that teaches you to live without them. You don't know how to suffer. No one does. There is no manual. There is no perfect technique. There is no right way. There is only you, going through what life has put in front of you, doing the best you can with the resources you have at that moment. And that, just that, is already dignity. It is already courage. It is already a lucid revolt against a universe that did not promise coherence. You don't need to turn your pain into wisdom. You don't need to find the hidden purpose. You don't need to be grateful for what broke you. You can simply acknowledge that you suffered, that you survived, and that you are still here, not stronger, just more aware, more honest, more willing to live without guarantees. And paradoxically, that is exactly what sets you free. Because the hardest truth about suffering is not that it hurts, it's that it can hurt for no reason. And knowing this, accepting this, consciously inhabiting this, perhaps that is the only wisdom that suffering really offers. Not the explanation, but the dissolution of the need for explanation. And with it, the possibility of finally existing as you really are. Fragile, vulnerable, radically free, and completely human. I leave you with a question to reflect on in the comments. Have you ever noticed that you are demanding that your pain makes sense, and that perhaps this demand is heavier than the pain itself? Watch the next videos on the channel, count on me, and follow the white rabbit.